On today's episode of Why Is This Thing Not Back on the Road Yet?, we try to take care of some minor inconveniences, like not having brakes. So in the endless line of projects, we've got this. And we've definitely not forgot about this. It's just been in, proper long-term storage. Now, I wasn't lying about proper storage. We did unhook the batteries. So we'll check the oil. Well, make sure nothing leaked out of it anyways. Looks like the roof repair didn't hold up too well. See, I wasn't lying about premium storage. See if there's any wasps in here yet. Huh. That's interesting that the lights, those things must stay on for a while when you first plug in the batteries. Alright, got her in neutral. See if I can remember how to turn this thing on. Push that in. Maybe we'll leave that off and just crank it for a while. To the danger zone. No, we're not going to do that. Now the old Deuce here has been out of service for a while. Even though it's sort of been in running condition, the brakes needed some help and really didn't want to keep driving it with sketchy brakes. These trucks have a single circuit brake system, so if you blow out one line or wheel cylinder or anything, you're basically out of brakes. And in addition to most of the brake lines being original to the truck, this particular one had some issues with the air booster down there that gave you the power assist. And by issues, I mean it wasn't working at all. They say you can't drive these without the air assist or, any air pressure. Well, that's kind of false, I guess, because this thing was not receiving any boost from the air pack, and you had to just really stand on the brakes. So basically one day I decided to spray some oil into the one inlet and let it sit for a while, and after a couple of weeks I hammered on the brakes once, just to try and stop in normal fashion, and I felt a pop and the pedal got soft, and sure enough the air boost all of a sudden started working, which that basically just proved that we had some pretty major issues. So we're going to go through the entire brake system front to back and give it a once-over. It's a good thing that we're in here checking stuff out, because that back bearing was pretty dry. Whoever was in here before really didn't put enough grease. They just had a little bit, packed the bearings front and back and didn't fill the hub cavity. So I think these bearings might be salvageable. We'll have to give them a good inspection. But boy, I don't think they'd have survived another 100 miles of driving. The wheel cylinders are also leaking, and they were dripping a bit of fluid. Yeah, there wasn't much grease in there. And that's brake fluid. Now the Army wasn't too plentiful with the grease, but for $1.39, we're just going to shovel it in. Nothing is light on this truck. So we're slowly getting there. This is basically like doing it on your car, just a lot more lower back pain. And the good thing that we're almost done with this one. We've only got 5 more to go. And I just realized I forgot to put on the dust shield. And once again, we almost came close to putting it back together, and then realized we had one of the cone washers in the wrong spot. So, you know, practice makes perfect, I guess. And we just got the drums back from the machine shop. So far, these are the worst of the shoes. They're worn pretty thin, and every wheel cylinder I've taken out thus far was leaking. I don't think I'm going to complain about doing a normal brake job on a car for a while. Now, I've had some people ask, why haven't I been driving the Deuce and a half? And it's mainly because I took it off the road. You see, it needed some maintenance, and in my mind, it really wasn't roadworthy until it got it. Now, believe me, I'm all for going on an adventure with something that it's unproven. You don't know if you're going to break down. You know, it's a road trip. You never know what you run into. However, when you get to a daily driver type deal, you got to put a little bit more effort into it. Daily driving old junk is totally possible, but it definitely comes with a little bit more responsibility and preparedness. That's the last thing you want to be doing when it's like 10 degrees outside and you go out and your truck won't start in the morning. You got to kind of anticipate these things and try and head those off at the pass. Driving something old requires you to always be attentive and perceptive to what's going on with the vehicle. Old vehicles are always going to require some maintenance, but the trick is for you to find it before it causes a problem. Now, a case like this Deuce and a half, there was really nothing wrong with it. The brakes sort of work. They actually fixed themselves at one point, you know, and the booster started working. However, I knew that a lot of the stuff had not been changed for a long time, and that this system in particular is very susceptible to issues and any problem. It's a single circuit brake line. If anything blows out a wheel cylinder, you're done. You got no brakes. And I think that's where a lot of people get disappointed when they buy an older vehicle and try and daily drive it or use it in regular use. You're always going to have issues, especially in something old, but you got to be prepared and be ready for when those breakdowns occur. I mean, I keep an inventory of commonly used and spare parts for these vehicles that I run every day. Stuff is going to break. That's just a fact of life. Now, don't get me started on the quality of aftermarket parts. You know, that's one of the biggest downfalls and Achilles heels of trying to keep an older vehicle on the road these days. Half the time you can't get anything but an import, and when you do, it's a fraction of the quality that the OEM part was. And that means that you're replacing potentially a quality OEM part with something that's aftermarket and only going to last 25% of the life the original part was. But that's a whole other story for another day. So right now we're making the brake lines. Even though it costs a little bit more, I've actually switched over to mainly using that copper nickel brake line because it's so much easier to bend. However, apparently due to coronavirus, you can't get this stuff cheap now, so we just stuck with plain old epoxy covered steel for the 5/16. Now, I know some guys just use RTV or silicone to seal the keyring gap. However, I didn't feel like waiting for the proper gear oil RTV gasket maker. So in my miscellaneous gasket pile, we had some cork gasket that's 1/8 inch thick, and just made up my own little square tabs to jam into there. Because I'm definitely not taking the time to clean all the grease out of there. One piece goes under the bearing, seal goes in on top, and then you put the other one in. You spend so much time cleaning up all these little parts to reuse them. I understand why people just buy all brand new stuff, but we're not going to spend that money. And nothing's coming apart easy. All new rubber brake lines, hoses for everything. Those ones are probably dang near original, or at least 20 some years old. It's always better to spend like 20 tedious minutes cleaning up parts rather than just spending the, $10 to buy new stuff. But that requires planning and money, and I didn't plan on spending the money, so this is where we're at. So we've just been having the time of our lives replacing all these brake lines and hoses. These drums have a dual adjustment system, so you do minor adjustments at the top here with those cams, and a major adjustment also can move the bottoms in and out. And when you move one, it affects the other, so you go around in a feedback loop until you're thoroughly frustrated. And apparently some of the aftermarket shoes are a bit on the large side for the diameter, so even when you have everything backed off as loose as it'll go, you still can't quite achieve the recommended clearances between the shoes and the drum. Hopefully things just sort of wear in after we get some driving time on it, and once it's broken in and kind of worn down a little bit, we'll go through everything again and readjust it and see if we can hit those 15 thousandths clearances. Gonna need a good solid coating of groil on here once we finish up the brake lines. Those hoses are from 1987, but they're still new. Got the new windows installed. Somehow we were actually able to remove all of the screws holding in the window assemblies without stripping anything. Since the brake master cylinder is in a very serviceable location, we're going to upgrade and put a remote reservoir mount somewhere on the back wall over there and plumb it into this so we can fill it without having to take the floor apart. Due to the shortage of everything these days, was not able to source a new old stock or a reproduction cover for the cab. So we just gave up on that, tried to duct tape some regular tarps, those didn't hold up. Was able to find a piece of an old scrap trucker's tarp. It was blue, so we just spray painted it green and then stuck it to the old roof with some Gorilla Construction adhesive and called it a day. Yeah, the professional roof repair is holding up alright. And we got a new seat cover. It's definitely not an old BDU shirt tied on there. We're going to pretend we didn't see all that grunge on there. Here is the air pack. This is the air assist hydraulic booster that basically gives the Deuce its power brakes. So even from the first time I drove the Deuce, you really had to step on the brakes. Like, it felt like you were driving a vehicle that didn't have power brakes. And previous owner just said that's how it's always been, so I just assumed that's how it was. Well, after driving it home, driving it for a while, and reading online, it definitely sounded like that was not normal for this braking system. At one point, I pulled off one of the air intake hoses or lines, sprayed a bunch of air tool oil into it, hopefully free things up. Nothing happened for the first couple of trips, but eventually when I was moving it, I decided to just hit the brakes really hard once to make sure no lines were going to break, and all of a sudden the pedal went to the floor. I thought I blew a brake line. Pumped it a couple more times and the pedal firmed up. Turns out something finally broke loose into this booster, and I all of a sudden had power assisted brakes. So my prediction is that this piston was stuck in here somewhere. Hopefully it's not rusted too bad. It was sort of working, so ideally this could be salvageable. We're going to try and just make do with the rebuild kit. Definitely wasn't safe, in my opinion, to keep driving it this way, being that it was froze up and seized for years and finally broke free. It deserves a rebuild. So there's definitely some rust in there. Not sure if that's brake fluid or a bunch of the oil that I sprayed in. There's the piston. Well, there's definitely some grunge in there. Man, it doesn't look like Nirvana. Well, that's the consistency of chocolate. So the inside of that is pretty bad. Well, I don't really want to show you. Well, alright. I mean, I've already kind of scuffed it up, and there's definitely some pitting in that whole spot at the bottom, but I think we can bring it around. I mean, things go from looking brand new, you know, with still Vaseline on it, to not so minty fresh. So we've had this apart for about a minute and a half, and we've already lost track of which way all of the seals go. So it's going to force us to work our way back through the function of this thing to double check and make sure everything is in there correctly. You see, this is just a forced opportunity to learn something. That's all it is. There's definitely some moisture in here. This air pack was definitely in need of a rebuild. Here's a tool I didn't have for years, but now you find all sorts of uses for it. It's just a 1/4 inch mandrel bar that's split on the end, and you can throw a piece of emery cloth in there. It's great for polishing up and refinishing the inside of a bore, whether it's a pipe you got to clean out, or in this case a master cylinder type deal. Put on whatever grit you want, buzzer through for a little bit, and you're good to go. We'll get it back past the threads before we fire it up. Now, after a bunch of carburetor cleaner and way too much time with the wire brush, things are coming back together. Now, I won't bore you with all the mundane details of, paint chips getting stuck in places they shouldn't be. We got the new lip seal on the main piston here. And one of the other upgrades that we're going to do while we're into this thing is moving the pressure sensor for the brake light. Now, here's the original one, and it was basically down here, and this took a pressure reading off of the hydraulic circuit. Now, my brake lights weren't working correctly. They were kind of intermittent when they would work. And I've also read that these pressure switches can sometimes rupture internally and cause a brake fluid leak out the front. And again, with a system like this, when that blows out, you're out of brakes. So the upgrade that you can do is to convert it over from a hydraulic pressure switch to a pneumatic pressure switch, which is on the pressured side of the air assist. So if you blow out this sensor, you're not without brakes completely. So a couple of adapter pieces, and this is going to be the new brake switch run off the air. Now, most of the seals and everything were actually still pliable, in pretty good shape. So we're going to keep all the extras in a bag in a emergency pile in the truck, because you never know if you're desperate or need a part like that. It's better than nothing. I also threw this little square head plug into the vise and broke it free, because it's always a lot harder when you're underneath the truck to try and get that loose. I'm guessing that's the lubrication port that you can spray some oil directly in there when it's all together. For the heart of the system, we actually got a new old stock master cylinder. Surprisingly enough, this wasn't terribly hard to find and not really that expensive. But it even comes with a new boot, push rod, top cap. Can't complain about that. Better double check. Oh yeah. Looks like she's good to go. Since we're not spending the money on a new can, we are just going to continue buffing those pits until they disappear. Well, that's pretty well polished up. I mean, we might only get like 40,000 miles out of it versus 75,000. We can live with that. One of the threaded holes was bad, and so was the bolt. It was bad, but it's an odd size, so we got to save it. We got the big piston in there, Had to trim that gasket a little bit to fit around those studs. Almost together. Now the next purchase, which I actually had to spray some oil onto the wallet to break it open, we bought a brand new sprayer here to make a power bleeder for the brakes. So we got this beautiful $13 Amazon special. It's got a fancy wand holder in the handle and everything. And what you do is you just fill that up with some brake fluid, pump it up, pressurize it, connect a hose there from the end of the nozzle, run that over to the top of your master cylinder, and there's a vent line that goes through the cap. And you can just tape the handle on it, and basically you're going to pressurize it constantly into the master cylinder, so you can go around to each wheel cylinder, crack the bleeder nuts, and one-man job, do the brakes. And once we're done with that, we'll put it back to use killing weeds. Now this is an old brake fluid I just had laying around, but we are going to keep this whole system .5 silicone, mainly because before I realized that, you know, there is the option to completely flush out the system, or in this case when you're starting out completely empty, you can go over to a traditional .3 style fluid. But we already bought a gallon of military surplus .5 fluid, so we're going to stay the course, and that's what we're going to use. I would like to think that being that this is a silicone-based fluid, it's not supposed to absorb water like the other whatever-based system that the .3/4, it actually absorbs water if it's exposed to humidity. Now that's not to say if there's ever any water in here, it probably doesn't mix, and it, you know, filters down to the bottom of the system and just pools there and ends up rusting at that certain spot. Sort of the difference between using ethanol fuel and non-ethanol fuel. So there it is. You just got to set the cruise control and go pop all the bleeders. Pedal keeps returning to the same spot, so that's how you can tell there's no air. Usually let it sit for a while. If you can hit it and it goes a little bit more to the floor, you've got a little bit of air. But if you can let it sit for, 30 seconds to a minute and hit it, and it stops at the exact same spot, you're usually good to go. So we got to adapt from the old connector here to the new air pressure sending unit. So we used some dog fence underground wire to make some adapter pieces. For some reason, we're not getting fuel up through the pump, and in the process of troubleshooting, killed the batteries. So we have a no start position here. Lift pump is getting fuel to the main injection pump, but we have nothing at the injectors. So according to the interwebs, that little plunger down there on the inside of the hydraulic head is supposed to move. So we've pulled out the plug, and we're going to put some ATF down there to try and make sure everything's free. So we put a pen down in there to crank the motor over and see if it moves. Okay. Not exactly where we wanted to end up this time of the season, but I guess there's no better place to break down than right in front of the garage, so we're going to have to let this thing sit here until we get into the injection pump. Maybe I ought to try and keep some more water out of that fuel tank. Hopefully keep the roof from leaking as well. Until next time.